This episode of the V2V Podcast Survivor Series has been brought to you by Continuum Infosys Cybersecurity.
Hello, welcome to the V2V Podcast. This is Marcus Parrish, and this is another episode of what we're calling our Survivor Series. Today is a little bit different than some of the other interviews that we've done, talking to survivors about the troubled teen industry, which is a group of facilities and programs that are called therapeutic boarding schools, wilderness camps. Most of the people that we've spoken to about the troubled teen industry have recounted some pretty emotionally and even physically brutal circumstances that they had to go through after their parents sent them to these places. And a lot of what we speak about during these interviews relates to their experiences and what perhaps can be done, differently, different choices that parents and children can make when things aren't going right. So my guest today, along in association with his son, his quote-unquote troubled teen, chose a different path in dealing with the situations they were facing. Who we have on the show today is a gentleman by the name of Dr. Kevin Fall. He's an award-winning speaker, author, psychologist, and leading expert in human connectedness. He received his PhD from the University of Iowa in psychology and spent years working with some of the most hardened and dangerous individuals with histories of violence and severe mental illness. These days, Dr. Fall is specializing in helping parents and their teens and young adults overcome barriers that prevent them from truly connecting and discovering a deeper and more meaningful relationship with one another. Dr. Kevin Fall had a situation with his son Austin, and as he was growing up, Austin started exhibiting more and more attitudes and behaviors that would commonly be referred to as troubled. Drinking, skipping school, legal trouble, and Kevin Fall at the time did not really know, what to do. And through a lot of dedication and also deciding to go back to school to become a psychologist and get a PhD in the subject, he decided to figure it out in association with his son. It was a process that they both worked through together. So today what I want to do is talk to Dr. Fall about his experiences with his son and perhaps his own failings as a parent and how they overcame these obstacles and developed a truly life-affirming relationship with each other, and now he, in fact, is teaching other people how to do the same thing. So welcome to the show, Dr. Kevin Fall.
Marcus, it's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on. We have so much to talk about.
Indeed. So I guess I just want to get right into it. I spoke a little bit generally about your son Austin and the things that you were seeing him go through and not knowing how to deal with. So I'd like you to talk a little bit about kind of before the quote-unquote trouble started, how that manifested, and then kind of get into what changes you both made to overcome these struggles.
Well, Austin and his mother and I and my younger son, Alex, lived together in Dallas, Texas, and our marriage was falling apart. It was never a good marriage. And we split in when Austin was about 5. And I can remember the gut-wrenching goodbyes on my visitations to see Austin, and the torture and shame I felt as a parent for having screwed up his life. There were some small indications, or some not so significant indications that his life was not going in the right direction. He started getting in trouble, started getting fights in younger grades, and it became progressively more serious as he advanced in his schooling. I was IT professional, and I would travel around the country consulting, and Austin and I lived about 8 hours apart, and then I moved from Dallas to Maryland, and then we lived about 15 hours apart, a car drive. But I would have my 2 sons in the summer, and I would try to pack 12 months of parenting into 2 months, and I would do 99% of my parenting just absolutely great. The other 1%, I would use some of the same tools on my 2 sons that my parents used on them. It was generational abuse that had been passed down for who knows how long. And I was like I said, I used the same tools on my sons. I would yell, and I would shake them, and I would use corporal punishment, and many of those things I did to them I would call abusive. Long story short, not only was abuse passed down, but this incredible sense of shame was passed down from generations, this idea that I'm not enough. And when we experience shame, we behave differently than when we don't. And I would see Austin have this low sense of confidence, and he would come to visit me, and my goal would be to get his confidence up. And he just kept deteriorating to the point where at the age of 18 and 19, and 20, he had accumulated a number of felonies. They're non-person felonies. They were like property damage type, but they were felonies nonetheless, very serious. He had dropped out of high school. He was a fighter. He's a big kid. He's got a over-the-top A personality. He was a fighter, and he was either going to be killed or go to prison. Something was going to happen to him. And as this is all happening, I started to work on myself. I had a number of things in my life that was not going right, even though I was very successful professionally. And so I started working on myself, and I decided to get a PhD. I'm watching my son deteriorate. I'm starting to see my life get better. I wanted to become a psychologist. And my first semester at the University of Iowa, I get this call from my son. He's saying, "Dad, I'm going to kill myself."
Wow.
And he has all this, "You're my last hope," he said. And I said, "Come live with me." And that's what I said, Marcus. But in my mind, I was thinking, oh, crap. How am I going to do this? I'm working 2 jobs. I'm studying. I was probably putting in 90 hours a week every week. And I'm thinking, how am I possibly going to do that? But the father side of me said, "Come on down." And so that began our journey of healing that started out when Austin moved in and we became roommates at the University of Iowa. And so stop me at any time, Marcus, here.
No, that's interesting, because that really kind of leads into the first step in your 7-step program. Now, I'll mention the book now because it kind of applies. You and your son wrote a book called How to Get Your Son Back: 7 Steps to Reconnect and Repair Your Relationship. Now, I know that you mentioned too in the preface in the book that although it's called How to Get Your Son Back, it certainly can apply to daughters, mothers and daughters, mothers and sons. Any dynamic really works in this context.
That's correct.
So the first step that you that you put down was stop fighting.
Yes.
Now, it appears from this testimonial that you're giving that at this point, with all the trouble that was going on with him, you really striving to change your own life and do something different, you came to the conclusion that by offering this refuge to him, by allowing him to move in with you, even though you were putting in so much time and effort into your own life, that it was time to basically to stop fighting and come together.
That's correct. Boy, I tell you, Marcus, I delivered more lectures to my son Austin than most professors do in their lifetime, knowing each time I created this lecture, it was going to trip the trigger that was going to be the light bulb moment for Austin, and he was going to change his direction forever. And that was the delusion I was living in. And it's at this point that we're addressing the parents out here who are listening, who say, I'm out of answers. I am desperate to do something with my son or daughter, and I don't know what to do. That is what I hear from hundreds of parents. They say, I'm out of answers. And so we hammered our children to change, and that's not going to happen. But the one person we can change is me, us, the parents. And that's going to be the most effective tool we have in reconnecting and changing our children's lives. So back to the stop fighting. We talk about how we need to step into our children's shoes, see the life they see it. And the reason this works for men, boys and girls, moms and dads, is because it takes a very base level behavioral approach. Our kids have 3 goals. And we have 3 goals, and those goals are in common. We want to belong. We want to be loved. We want to be valued. We want to be appreciated. We also, the second goal is we want to avoid rejection. And the third goal is we're trying to balance between these 2 opposing forces that psychology has not yet done any research on: loneliness and shame. And so these are evolutionary drives that we're addressing here, and that's why it applies to human beings, not just sons. And so once we start understanding that our sons or daughters are acting out, trying to accomplish these 3 goals that are extremely difficult, we begin to understand, and I was able to accomplish that with my own journey. We're able to step into the shoes and begin empathizing and having compassion rather than thinking, what the hell are these kids thinking? So once we're able to step into their shoes, without saying a word, the dynamics of the relationship starts to shift. So that's the first step, is understanding that we're all attempting to accomplish these 3 things.
Right, and that really brings us to step 2. So when he moved in with you, that was the beginning of reconnecting and repairing that relationship, because you were both present in the same place at the same time. So how did that work? What were some of the initial things that occurred once he came to Iowa and moved in with you?
That was really the pivotal point, because he came up there into a Big Ten university town, being a high school dropout. He was scared to death to leave the apartment. And I sat down with him one day, and the lectures were over, but I started connecting with him in a new way. Previously, I had apologized to my sons for my behavior, my yelling, and my abusive parenting. And I apologized to them, and I made a commitment and kept that I was no longer going to do that. So by doing that, I began to develop trust, as they saw, Dad was serious. He's really not going to do that. He's really not going to yell at us anymore. So I'm sitting here with Austin, who's scared to death to go out of his apartment. And I went from being a coach on the player and telling him what to do to being a player in the game with him. And I said, Austin, I have walked away from my job, a lucrative job, to become a psychologist. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I don't know that my plan is going to work or not. And I'm scared to death as well. And so this vulnerability I was able to share with him, and repairing a relationship doesn't happen in one conversation, but this is the way I started approaching him is we're in this together. We're both starting our lives over. And that, of course, adds a lot of credibility and trust to what I'm doing. I'm no longer lecturing him. I'm leading him.
Right.
And so...
Right. So, sorry to interrupt, but...
no, you're good.
Okay, so he's there. You've decided to essentially stop fighting with him, and then something else happened, and what that something else was that Austin essentially continued on the same path that he was on before, in a sense, in that he needed to, I guess, for lack of a better word or phrase, hit rock bottom. Now,
yes,
I know that in another interview I heard you give, and he was a part of, he explained that he began partying at the school and drinking heavily and getting into further trouble.
Yes.
This of course leads us to step 3, a step in. Be there when your son hits rock bottom. So you're developing trust. You're empathizing with him. Perhaps at this point you're more aware of the things that he's going through because he's opening up to you a bit, but you're seeing that he's still in decline. So
yes.
How did you step in when you saw that things weren't necessarily going well for him, even though you were making these steps to reconnect with him?
Yes. The thing about going from coach to player as a parent is we get to recognize that our kids are now adults. And there becomes a time when our kids are done listening to us. We're done teaching them. We're in the game together. And making that shift is a very powerful shift. And it goes with empowering both Austin and Alex with that authority to make your own decisions. You also get to live with the consequences.
Right.
So when trouble happens, we're so quick to save our kids from the pain that results from it. And that, we've already set expectations that they're going to make the decisions and they're going to reap the consequences for them, both good and bad. I'll be here with you, Austin, but I'm not going to bail you out because you're an adult now and you make the same decisions. And so it's a matter of not rescuing them from the problems, but it's being there in a non-judgmental way and saying, okay, what are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? And how can I help you? And so
he really came to some realizations that based on your input, and showing him that he was in fact responsible for his own actions and that he may suffer further consequences, good or bad, depending on what choices he made. He began to understand that he was in fact an autonomous person who gets to decide how he wants to live his life. And you're saying, look, I get that as a parent. I understand that you get to make these choices, but let's take a really good look at the choices that you're making and where that's going to lead you.
Yes.
Bringing us easily to step 4, lead your team. So you're now giving your son an example to follow, saying, look, this is what I went through. These are the things that I didn't do right. These are the consequences I paid. Let's take a look at what you're doing and how that is currently affecting your life, and how that may, in fact, very much affect your life in the near and not so. Let me put that a different way. In the now and in the future. So apparently that got his attention. I mean, you decided to step in and lead, and something happened.
And leading takes different forms, and Austin goes from being this badass guy who likes to fight to watching me work all these hours, and Marcus, I was starting to crumble under all the hours, and in addition,
I can imagine.
My parents were aging and having problems with aging, and I remember one time I was laying on the couch, and he walks in and he goes, "What's wrong, Dad?" So here's a son who has this background, and he's expressing concern about his dad. And I got to say, I told him, Austin, I'm burnt out. I'm feeling depressed. I think I need to go talk to someone. And that's an example of leading. Hey, I've got a problem I need to address, and I'm going to take ownership and take action. And that's kind of the leadership and conversation we were having, and set the ground for step 5, where you get them the help they need. He knows, okay, going and seeing a therapist for a specific reason is not for just sissies. It's for everyone. Right. Dad's right. Doing it. And that's how I led him, is by example.
Right. Interesting. So you went to a therapist?
I did. I went several times while I was in college.
And then, and did he at some point join you, or what happened with him in seeing you take some responsibility for what you were going through, and took proactive measures to fix yourself, in a sense. So what did he follow you?
He did. We started understanding what was going on with him. Understood that he had terrible ADHD, understood his anxiety was very bad, understood his feeling depressed. And once we knew those specific things that we needed to work on, and we talked openly about it, he was willing to go see a professional. I remember one time, if I may share real quick, Marcus, I remember one time in the kitchen, he was taking a I had gotten him to enroll in college, and he was at the University of Iowa, making great grades, even though he was partying his tail off. I remember getting angry at him and saying, he had dropped a math class, and I said, if you would spend as much time studying as you did do partying, you wouldn't have to drop this class. I was falling back into my old patterns, okay?
Right.
And Austin looks me right in the eye and he goes, Dad, I wish you could feel what it's like to be in my body for one day. And it's like he kicked me in the stomach. And I thought, I'm not listening to my son. And so we started to have this conversation about specific problems. We got him into a good therapist to work on specific issues, not general issues, and a psychiatrist for medication. And we really started seeing him turn his grades around. And I think a lot of times we look for I remember one more conversation I'll share. He came in late one night, and we were watching a football game together, and he goes, it was a Saturday night. He's always out partying on Saturday night. He goes, Dad, I'm starting to lose it for the party scene. I'm seeing what's going on. And instead of saying something like I would have said, well, it's about time. That's what I've been telling you. I just let him talk. And so often I think we look for our kids to make these turn on the dime decisions that will change their lives around, and that's not the way it works. I allowed him space to come to it on his own. And those big mile markers were what I looked at over the years we lived together. And so
absolutely,
he started getting help.
So this is really interesting. So now that we're here dealing with these deeper problems, it sounds like this isn't a linear process. Like, and meaning that, I mean, just based on what you just said, reverting back to these old behaviors, at some point, throughout this process and in fact through life, you go back to step one. You go back to stop fighting. You go back to reconnecting. Both of you now are stepping in on each other in a sense, and I am beginning to see by Austin saying, "Hey, Dad, I wish that you could be me for a minute." He's now taking some responsibility and leading you.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
And because this is so organic and kind of non-linear, as I was saying, that let me back up a little bit. I know a lot of people get really nervous about these step type processes, and
yes.
and they're like, oh well, this is like a weird formulaic, like I'll do 1 through 10, and my life's going to be so much better. I don't think so. I'm not even gonna look at it because it sounds too good to be true. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Nothing really works that way. So I want to disabuse people of this idea that this is some kind of magical cure. Just do 1 through 7 and you're going to be okay. This is a process that continues and it's refined, and these are general ideas that you're presenting with that can have really impactful results for everybody involved. And so it kind of leads us to like step 6 because he's getting therapy. He's taking medication for ADHD, which is probably clarifying his thoughts a lot. Mm-hmm. So now that you're kind of on the same page, so to speak, or at least like leveled out, like in your relationship and also with his biochemistry, you can begin to what you phrase in step 6, maximize his growth. So you're now able to perhaps help your son develop some confidence and feel that he's having some success in life.
Marcus, I'm so glad you talked about this idea of it being a magical process. It's not. And the next step 6, is adopting a recovery mindset. And the recovery mindset is me as dad, as a psychologist, I'm still growing. Austin and I still butt heads, but he knows I have his back and I know he has my back. And so we know we're improving all the time. And so it's cementing those gains that we make in therapy for specific problems, and then living out our life as if we're both on this journey to continually get better. And parents struggle with this idea that they have to give up their authority, they have to give up being right, which most of the time they're right in what they want their kids to do. But it's
because parents were kids too. And that's often forgotten, by everybody.
Yes.
including the other adults in the room that hey, that old guy over there, like he's not really worth anyone's time because he's old. Well, he may have an exponential amount of experience than someone, half his age. He may have done 4 times as many things that someone half his age has done. Yes. So don't let that experience turn you off. It's it's valuable. Like parents know stuff.
They do, and I think the whole point of the book. I think the whole point of the book is the way to relay that experience is through a positive relationship not with a hammer or not sending your kid away to a farm somewhere.
Right.
Parenting is a full contact sport, and we cannot outsource it.
Sure, absolutely. So, and the final step is create your best life, and that's interesting because what happened is as you were kind of formulating this process, you codified it into this book that you wrote with Austin.
Yes,
that's really amazing because that's uncommon. So how did that kind of come about? And I want to allow you to kind of talk about what you're doing now with Life Doctor, and I know you wanted to make an offer to listeners regarding some consultation about things that they may be going through.
Yes. It's interesting. If I step back and look at Austin, he came to see me. His mindset was very selfish. He was always defensive and had really struggled with relationships. And as he watched me volunteer my time with homeless people, as he saw me live by example, trying to improve my life, he began to gain those principles. And as he has grown, he said, Dad, I want to help people. And so here's the swing, and that's why we decided to write this book. And I'm so concerned for parents out there. Parenting is not like it used to be. Parents need help. And, one of the things that we do is we consult with parents. And I just really moved by what you're doing, Marcus. And I want to offer your parents a free 30-minute consult. So if you're listening to this podcast, I'd like you to, and you're interested in a 30-minute consult on some things that maybe you could do better, the things that you can do to kind of shift the relationship around and start in a more positive way, I invite you to email me at Kevin, Kevin, at lifedoctor, LIFEDOCTOR.com. Email me and say, I was listening to Marcus. I'd like to take you up on the 30-minute consultation, free of charge. And I would love to talk to you because I love Marcus's work and what he's doing with this TTI industry. And parents, we've got to step up. And it's not so much a matter of working harder. It's a matter of working smarter. And I want to help you do that because I've been right where you are before.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Fall. And I'll make sure to include all this information in the show notes, the Life Doctor website, links to your book on Amazon, of course, so that our listeners can get a really clear look at what exactly it is that you're doing, and the positive things that you're doing that to help make people create positive change in their life. It's really amazing and valuable, the work that you're doing, and I really appreciate you too. So thank you.
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, Marcus, I appreciate you too, and I'm going to be promoting your podcasts as well because parents need this information. There's a scarcity of information of what do I do when my son or daughter goes south, and right. I love what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks. It's really interesting the fact that there is seemingly such a lack of information about this kind of thing, that, the stuff that you're doing on a positive track, and also the darker side of the reason that we decided to do this series in the first place. So-called therapeutic boarding schools. There is a different way to go about healing your troubled child and yourself. And so I wanted to say thank you again for coming on the show, and we'll talk again soon.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Mark.